The day it all started wasn't extraordinary in any way. The sky was partly cloudy. The air had that crisp edge of early spring. And I was looking forward to nothing more than a peaceful afternoon with my fishing rod. Fishing had always been my way of resetting. No phone calls, no work emails, no noise, except for the occasional splash of water and the chorus of birds nesting in the trees along the shoreline. The lake was a neighborhood fixture, a quiet little reservoir that everyone seemed to assume was shared, and I had spent countless weekends casting my line into its waters. Nobody ever stopped me. Nobody ever complained. For me, the lake wasn't just a place to fish. It was part of my rhythm of life. That rhythm came to a screeching halt when I heard footsteps crunching over the gravel behind me. I turned, expecting to see another neighbor coming down with a folding chair, or maybe a curious kid with a net. Instead, it was the HOA president, clipboard tucked under one arm like he was a sheriff in some old Western movie. His expression told me this wasn't a friendly chat. He walked with a kind of deliberate stiffness, chin raised just enough to signal he thought he was in charge of more than he really was. I stayed seated, figuring whatever it was, it couldn't be too serious. "Sir," he said without preamble, his voice clipped and officious, "you are in violation of community regulations." I frowned, half thinking I'd misheard him. Violation? For what? "I'm sitting here fishing, same as always." He cleared his throat and adjusted the clipboard like he was about to recite a law out of a courtroom. The HOA covenants explicitly state that fishing in the community lake is prohibited without written authorization. As of today, you have not obtained such authorization. As such, a fine of $600 is being issued for this violation. I blinked at him. At first, I genuinely thought he was joking. $600 for fishing? It sounded more like something you'd see on a bad sitcom than in real life. But he wasn't smiling. His face was locked in that rigid mask of self-importance, and when he held out a piece of paper, I realized with sinking clarity that he was absolutely serious. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, finally standing to face him. $600 for sitting by the water with a fishing rod? It's been fishing here for years, and no one has ever said a word. Whether or not anyone has enforced the rules before is irrelevant, he shot back, tone smug. The rules exist, and they will be enforced under my watch. Ignorance of the bylaws is not an excuse. You'll receive official notice in the mail. I could feel my temper rising, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Who owns this lake? Exactly, because last I checked, it's not listed under the HOA's property. Isn't this technically private land? That made him pause for half a second, but only long enough to wave off my question. Ownership is not the point. The HOA manages community use, and as such, we control access. Fishing is prohibited. You'll pay the fine, and this will be the end of it. It was like talking to a brick wall, only less reasonable. He wasn't interested in whether his claim was accurate or legal. He was interested in asserting power. The clipboard, the stiff posture, the bureaucratic jargon, it was all part of the act. He wanted me to feel small, to bow to the so-called authority of the HOA and cough up $600 without a fight. And maybe some neighbors would have done just that, writing the check just to avoid the hassle. But I'm not wired that way. "Let me make this clear," I said firmly. "I'm not paying you $600 for fishing in a lake you don't even own. You can send all the notices you want, but unless you can prove this is HOA property, you've got nothing." His eyes narrowed, and he scribbled something on his clipboard, like he was writing down my insolence for the record. "We'll see what the board has to say about your refusal to comply," he said coldly. "Expect to receive notice within the week." And with that, he spun on his heel and marched back up the path. Leaving me standing there in stunned disbelief, I packed up my gear early that day, not because I wanted to, but because the encounter had soured the entire experience. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't stop replaying the absurdity of it all. $600. That was nearly as much as my monthly mortgage payment. For fishing, I knew HOAs could be strict. Stories of people being fined for the color of their shutters or the length of their grass weren't new to me. But this felt different. This wasn't about aesthetics or uniformity. This was about control for the sake of control. When I got home, I tossed the fishing rod in the garage and pulled out my laptop. If the HOA president wanted to play hardball, I'd meet him there. I dug into the county's property records, cross-referencing the plat maps with the HOA's filings. Sure enough, my suspicion was correct. The lake was not owned by the HOA. It was listed as private property, belonging to an individual who lived out of state. The HOA may have had some arrangement for access, but legally speaking, they had no right to fine anyone for using it. The realization made me laugh out loud, though it was a bitter kind of laugh. Here I was being slapped with a $600 fine by people who had no legal claim to the very land they were policing. Over the next few days, the anger settled into something more calculated. At first, I thought about fighting the fine through formal channels, filing an appeal, showing up at the next board meeting with the property records in hand, and embarrassing them in front of everyone.
Wow.
But then I thought about what that would really mean. Hours of arguing with people who thrived on this kind of confrontation, who probably enjoyed dragging neighbors through red tape. It would be a victory, maybe, but a hollow one. I wanted something better, something that would shut them down once and for all. The fine notice did arrive in the mail a week later. Just as promised. It was typed up on official HOA letterhead, complete with threats of late fees if I didn't pay within 30 days. Most people would have been intimidated by the tone, but for me, it only hardened my resolve. They were bluffing, and I wasn't going to fold. If anything, their arrogance gave me the motivation to dig deeper. That's when I noticed a small but crucial detail in the county records. The lake property had recently been listed for sale. The out-of-state owner had apparently grown tired of maintaining it and was looking to offload it. The asking price wasn't cheap, but it wasn't astronomical either, at least. Not compared to the satisfaction I knew it would bring. In that moment, the idea crystallized in my mind. I wouldn't just fight the fine. I'd take the one thing they thought they controlled and make it mine. The HOA wanted to treat me like I was trespassing in my own neighborhood. Fine. I'd buy the lake, post my own rules, and leave them with nothing to stand on. I folded the fine notice neatly, tucked it into a folder labeled Evidence of Stupidity, and picked up the phone to call a realtor. Once I had tucked that absurd $600 fine into my Evidence of Stupidity folder, I knew exactly what my next move would be. Some people fight fire with fire. I prefer fighting arrogance with paperwork, and if I could own the very thing the HOA claimed authority over, there would be no debate, no loopholes, no endless board meetings. The irony was too delicious to ignore. They tried to punish me for fishing in a lake they didn't even own. What better way to shut them down than by owning it myself? The first step was contacting the realtor listed on the county's property. Record. The woman on the other end of the phone sounded almost relieved when I asked about the lake. "Oh yes, it's been on the market for months," she said, her tone brightening. "The current owner lives out of state, and maintaining a parcel with a water feature has just become too much of a burden. They're very motivated to sell." That phrase, motivated to sell, was music to my ears. I scheduled a meeting with her the very next day. When I pulled into her office parking lot, fine notice still sitting on my passenger seat like a reminder of my mission, I already knew I wasn't just window shopping. I sat down. She pulled up the listing, and sure enough, the lake was right. There on the screen. Parcel number, boundaries, acreage, and all. It wasn't just the water either. The sale included the surrounding shoreline and a narrow access path. In other words, ownership wasn't just symbolic. It came with real control over who stepped foot on the property. I didn't even try to hide my grin as I flipped through the paperwork. "Let's make an offer," I told her. She raised her eyebrows slightly, clearly surprised at how quickly I was moving, but she didn't ask questions. She just got to work. Within 2 weeks, after a flurry of signatures, and a wire transfer that hurt my bank account but thrilled my soul, the lake was mine. Legally, indisputably mine. The first thing I did before I even went fishing again was walk the perimeter with a stack of brand new signs. Private property, no trespassing without owner's permission. I posted them at every entrance point, making sure they were impossible to miss. Where the HOA had once barked about bylaws, now the law itself was on my side. Anyone who ignored those signs wouldn't be breaking some arbitrary HOA rule. They'd be breaking trespassing laws. It didn't take long for the news to spread. A couple of neighbors saw me posting the signs and asked about it, curiosity written all over their faces. When I told them I'd purchased the lake outright, their reactions ranged from shocked to delighted. One man chuckled and clapped me on the shoulder. "You're telling me you own the lake?" Was going to drive the HOA nuts? He wasn't wrong. Sure enough, the HOA president himself showed up on my porch less than a week later. He didn't even knock politely. He jabbed the doorbell like he was trying to puncture it. When I opened the door, there he stood, red-faced and sputtering. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, waving a copy of the HOA newsletter that had apparently circulated the news. "You can't just take over the community lake." Took my time answering, leaning against the doorframe with the deed in my hand like it was a winning lottery ticket. "I didn't take over anything," I said calmly. "I bought it. It's a private property now, my private property. Unless you've got a deed that says otherwise, the HOA has no authority over it anymore." His jaw dropped, but he quickly tried to recover. "That lake has always been a community amenity. Can't just lock everyone out." I shrugged. "Funny thing about ownership? I can." The HOA had no legal ownership, just an informal agreement. With the previous owner, that agreement ended the second I signed the papers. From now on, anyone who wants to use the lake can come to me directly. Otherwise, it's off limits," he sputtered, searching for words, but I pressed on before he could regroup. "Oh, and about that $600 fine? Consider it void. You tried to penalize me for using land you didn't own. Now, I'm the one who decides who fishes here, and I can. Tell you right now, you're not invited." The look on his face was priceless. For years, he had strutted around the neighborhood like a little king, ruling with bylaws and fines as his crown and scepter. Now, in one fell swoop, his power had evaporated. He stormed off without another word, muttering something about legal action, but we both knew he didn't have a case. A property deed trumps HOA bylaws every single time. Over the next month, the dynamics of the neighborhood shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. The lake that had once been touted as a community amenity was now unmistakably private. Neighbors, who had quietly resented the HOA's overreach, came to me with a kind of conspiratorial gratitude, offering congratulations and laughing about how poetic it was that the board had fined me right into ownership. Some even asked for permission to fish, and I happily granted it to anyone who wasn't tied up in HOA politics. For me, it wasn't about keeping people out, it was about making sure the board didn't get to dictate rules it had no right to make. The HOA tried to save face. The president wrote a long-winded column in the newsletter about community, spirit and miscommunication, but everyone knew the truth. His attempt to flex authority had backfired spectacularly. What was once their supposed domain was now my private retreat, and no amount of spin could change that. For me, the sweetest part wasn't just owning the lake. It was the peace that came with it. Every time I sat by the water with my rod, listening to the gentle splash of the line hitting the surface, I felt a deep satisfaction. The HOA had wanted me to pay $600 for the privilege of fishing. Instead, I paid a whole lot more and walked away with ownership of the entire lake. They thought they could nickel-and me into submission. They ended up giving me the push I needed to turn the tables entirely. Looking back, I almost have to thank them. Without that ridiculous fine, I never would have dug into the property records, never would have realized the lake was up for sale, and I never would have experienced the unmatched joy of watching the HOA president's face when I told him the lake was now private property mine. In the end, the $600 fishing fine was the best deal I never paid.